Welcome to Free Range Flock. We were once the latchkey kids who came home to an empty house after school. We were feral, resilient, cynical, and innovative. Older than Google. Our teenage faces were never posted on social media. The internet was just an idea in our youth. Now we are older, wiser, and thriving. Our independent ways will continue to serve us. We plan to keep defying the odds, and we will carve our own path with grace, with humor, with joy, our way. We've been through some stuff. We will continue to keep pushing, and we are not going anywhere. The former latchkey kids are now the free range flock.
So Sassa, do you have a favorite tradition, something that you do all the time that connects you to who you are and your family?
Traditions are hard.
Tradition.
I know, right?
We were singing that beforehand.
Literally the first thing that came into my mind when I saw the word tradition.
Fiddler on the roof.
Fiddler on the roof. That's hard because a lot of the family traditions that come to mind are around church and religion. And for anyone who knows me, I do not go to church. And it's not because I don't believe in a higher power. It's just that I do not like the politics of church anymore. So that makes this a really hard one because literally the first thing that came to mind was that Sunday morning tradition of getting up and going to Sunday school and going to church. And then you come home and you'd either go out to lunch with a bunch of other people who would leave in church, or you come home and you have lunch and then a big Sunday dinner.
Right.
So Sundays were like the big tradition day in my house. Now as an adult, and the fact that I don't go to organized religion services anymore, my traditions are much more around like what we do in our household, like around dinner. So we cook a lot, and so we tend to stand around in our kitchen and talk about our days and things like that as we were having a glass of wine and cooking dinner or whatever. So it's very much different, like childhood traditions versus adulthood traditions, and what I'm kind of rebuilding, in my own life that serve me. But traditions can be good and bad.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm sure that we're going to talk about that a little bit more.
That's why I bring it up, because we've been talking about it a lot lately between the two of us, because it can be good or bad. And I think that once I got to this point in my life, I realized that I was thinking more about them. Like, okay, my family's always done this. Is this something I want to continue? Right. Am I getting the same, joy out of it? And then creating new ones. Like, okay, this is what I enjoy, and I'm going to create a new tradition. And sometimes they come out of the blue. For example, my son and I have this nightly tradition. When I put him to bed, we'll both say, "See you next year," no matter what the date is. No matter what the date. Because during the pandemic, he and I were spending a lot of time together because it was during the pandemic. And it was December 31st, 2020. And we weren't, I wasn't going to let him stay up till midnight. So I was putting him to bed. And when I put him to bed, I said, "See you next year." And he went, "What?" And he thought that was the funniest thing he ever heard. So now, 3 years later, we still say it every night. Aww. To the point that if we don't say it, something's wrong. Like sometimes he'll say it first, sometimes I'll say it first. But there was a couple of times, I think you were taking care of him and I left town, he texted me, "See you next year." Aww. Like he had to say it. He had to say it to me. And that's a tradition. I mean, it's something that is very sweet and is very quick, but it means so much to us. It's really important.
That's adorable. I mean, that's
adorable.
It is. It's an adorable little tradition because it shows that connection and the fact that he reveres it as well. Yeah. And that it's so important that he's willing to text you when you're out of town. Yeah. Which is a lot for an 11-year-old boy.
It is a lot.
So.
So we're talking about traditions for this episode because some of us have a lot of anxiety around traditions, and then some of them they're created and they're sweet. sometimes I have to really wrestle with my anxiety and my guilt around traditions. And I think I'm still trying to figure that out as an adult, honestly. And as I'm getting older, sometimes there's that unspoken expectation around traditions. Like we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this because we've always done it. And sometimes things happen and things change, and then the tradition doesn't feel as genuine. I'm thinking of when my grandmother passed, and we tried very hard to keep Christmas and those traditions the same. And sometimes trying to keep them the same actually were harder in some ways. And it's just something that I think a lot of us are wrestling with and going, can I change this? Can we do it differently? Can I create some new ones so that I'm not always feeling so anxious and guilty about this tradition? So I felt like we needed to really talk about that. But traditions they're how we transmit our customs and beliefs from generation to generation. They're passed along the way. Like my son may say, see you next year to his kids. Who knows what's going to happen? But for some people, they can cause anxiety. And for some people, they can bring a sense of stability. So we're kind of all over the place. But now is the time to re-examine that tradition and that change and make sure it means something for you. So for this episode, we're going to talk about the importance of revisiting those traditions.
So Amy, it's really funny when we were starting this episode, we both started singing a song.
Tradition. Yes.
Yes, and so for those of you who don't know, that is from a musical called Fiddler on the Roof, and was a huge fan of that show. My mom loved it, and so we had the soundtrack and we played it a lot in our house. And it's got a lot of beautiful songs. And one is the one that we both started singing. Exactly. Is called Tradition, and it talks about the traditions that happen within this family. It's about a Jewish family. It was in between the period of World War I, World War II, when there was a lot of political unrest and discrimination against Jews. And these were Russian Jews, and so they knew they needed to leave, and so there was all this tension, and the Jewish families were trying to hold on to their traditions, and throughout the play, and it's not all heavy. There's a lot of joy and laughter that happens, but family members were either like cocooning up in those traditions or they were breaking them. Like one of the characters falls in love with a non-Jew, and so that's way outside of the traditional Orthodox Jewish tradition. And so there was that was one of the catalysts in the play to cause tension. But it's a beautiful example of traditions and how they can be really good, but they can also cause a lot of pain and grief in our families. And so I just wanted to mention that because traditions are so deep, and they can have so many meanings, and there's so many layers that happen.
Right. Yeah. So, I'm glad that you mentioned that. Like, I have seen the play, but I did not get that from, it's been so long since I've seen the play, so I probably did at the time, but I didn't remember that. I just, when we say every time we talked about tradition, we talked about tradition, we brought up the songs, which is saying so. But that's a good point to kind of start with is there a tradition in your life now that you need to revisit or change? Is that something you're thinking about?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, as I mentioned in Act 1, for me, so much of my tradition, again, goes back to religion. And I think that, especially where we live, there is a lot of religious tradition. And for me, that was an essential change because there were a lot of things that were happening within the churches that I was attending, and I'm not trying to disparage anybody or anyone's religion. It's just for me, it wasn't working anymore. And I needed to make that change because it was no longer serving me. So I needed to do something that worked for me. by no means disparaging religion, because it's been an important part of my family's life,
Right.
and it brings a lot of joy and comfort to people.
Right. I think for me, I kind of alluded to it earlier about something about the holidays, especially the Christmas holidays and that whole December craziness. I'm one of those people that, my life is great, and, I have many loved ones, and I see them during the holidays, but the whole Christmas holiday makes me anxious. It has for several years, and I think this is the whole meeting that expectation of let's be happy, let's be cheerful, let's make sure everyone gets a great present, everything's wrapped, everything's that kind of rush and stuff. I think some people love it, like the rushing around and getting the presents. I dislike it strongly. I don't like it. My favorite time in the holiday is the time after Christmas until the New Year. I call it the quiet. I love the quiet. I love when we have all calmed down and the big meals have been eaten, and now we're just kind of like reading our books and going slower. I love that. I always look forward to that. So I do love the Christmas holiday. I love being with my loved ones. I love surprising my son with presents and stuff. But that whole expectation, that consumerism, that whole big thing creates anxiety for me. So I'm trying to find new traditions to kind of slow that down, and so I can stop feeling that way all the time.
I think I would agree with you about the Christmas holiday. I think that's a big tradition in our culture that has been kind of turned on its head.
Yeah.
Because it used to be about family and about the events that surround your family, having a meal, walking in the snow, or, trimming a Christmas tree, or all of those things were the important part of the holiday.
Right.
And we've turned it into, now it's all about that consumeristic
buying something
need, right, to serve the economy god.
Yeah.
That's the part that I find offensive, because they've taken this beautiful family thing and turned it into something that is now the expectation you have to buy 50 gifts for your kid or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's great to buy presents, but it's like, buy presents throughout the year. Give of yourself. Don't feel like you have to buy all those big gifts. That expectation is unreasonable, and I think it causes a lot of anxiety for people. Because what if you don't have the money?
Yeah.
What if you can't keep up with the Joneses?
Or just figuring it out. Like, what do I get that person? I'm like, and then if I don't meet that expectation, I'm like, I want to get to the other side of that. I want to enjoy more of the quiet and being with my loved ones. I love being with my loved ones. But yeah, sometimes that whole build up, it's just hard. It's just hard.
It is hard.
But traditions reflect our priorities and our culture, and they give us a sense of belonging. And they have been passed down through families or friends or cultures. A lot of friends develop traditions together. They've done things together, and they have a significant meaning for people who practice that tradition. But sometimes life forces you to change your tradition, like a death in the family, or someone is sick, or it forces you to think, okay, why are we doing this? And question things. Sometimes tradition no longer makes you feel like you belong. Instead, it feels like the opposite. And that means that's time to kind of revisit it and to talk about it. And for some people who love it and want to keep recreating the holiday that they had in the 80s and the 90s, it's like, let's stop and talk about it. And can we do this a little differently? Can we eat something differently? Can we celebrate a little differently? Can we take the push off all these expectations of recreating that and can look at it differently? I would love to see all of us have that conversation and be willing to do that. But for some people, it's like, it's tradition. We've always done this. We've always done this. But sometimes it's hard. It's hard to do.
It is hard. And I think that re-examination is an important step in trying to understand the tradition. And is it important enough to keep? I think a lot of times we're trying to capture something, or recapture something with a tradition, whether that's a relationship or whether that's a feeling of of contentment, of that innocence of childhood. I mean, there's lots of different reasons to, using the Christmas example, of, why we do things around the holiday. Why do we put up a tree? Why do we, whatever. And is it important to you? I think that re-examination needs to be, is this something that brings you joy? I always come back to the whole Marie Kondo, does it bring you joy? But it's like, does it serve you? Does it bring you joy? Is there a reason to evolve it? Keep it, but make it more relevant to your life today. Yeah. And I think it's important to really re-examine the things that we do kind of mindlessly because it's tradition. Yeah.
And I think now I'm trying to be much more purposeful about creating traditions. Like my son and I were talking like, what do we want to do Christmas Day? What's going to be important to us? And we're like, we love watching movies and we're going to eat these foods because we love them. And we're going to do those things. And, we watched 6 movies on Christmas Day. And other people are like, oh, that's way too many. That's what we enjoy to do. We literally finished a movie, started another movie. We ate in between and, talked about things. And that's a tradition that we want. And it's serving us. And when it stops serving us, we need to revisit and do something different. So exactly. I think that's the kind of the big message for me this episode is just if that tradition is creating anxiety for you, it's time to rethink it. Now it's time to rethink it and maybe kick it on its head,
I think one of the things, too, is when you're re-examining those traditions, also, how does that fit into the family structure that you have? Mm-hmm. Because we can't ignore the fact that we're all connected to our families in one way or another, whether it's our chosen families or whether it's our, blood relatives. We're connected. Right. And so different people have different expectations, and it's trying to figure out where the traditions fit together, right? Like little puzzle pieces, because sometimes what's in your head and your expectation of what you want to do doesn't necessarily meld with the person that you're trying to celebrate with, right? If that makes sense, right? Again, I'm framing it around Christmas, but it can be any tradition, and making sure you figure out how things can fit together. Right.
And I mean, there's traditions that I have experienced that I love. Like I'm thinking of once a year, try to go to the beach with the girls and like our Gold Beach trip. And there's been some years I couldn't go for various reasons. But when we go, there's traditions. There's things that we do. Like we have a game night and we love to dance and we love to, eat a certain meal. And we know that this meal's coming because it's going to be really good. And then we leave and it's, there wasn't that expectation that didn't have that weight on me. It didn't make me feel anxious. And I looked forward to it. And when we were doing it, we're like, oh, remember this, and how this came to be. And then it was fun. But we created that ourselves because we enjoyed it. So yeah, I mean, there are traditions that we went and deliberately created because we wanted to enjoy them and do those things. Just like my son and I said, okay, now we're going to say Thursday night's game night. We're going to, we're going to stay home, we're going to turn off the TV, and we're going to play games and have conversation. We're deliberately creating a new tradition of things that we want because we need to set a priority around this and protect this time and enjoy it. And we love playing games. And so, we're creating traditions. And I know a lot of people are out there going, yes, we're going to do this because we're going to protect this time and do it and say this time is for this. It's important.
It is important. And I think when you're talking about traditions and setting aside time, I think that those protected times are so important because those are when you're making those connections with your friends and family. And we do need to make space for traditions, but only the ones that don't cause anxiety and make us happy.
Yeah, definitely.
And for me, we were talking about game night. We don't do games in my house, but we do food. We all love to cook and we all love to eat. And so, that kind of preparation time, that food time, we do that at least 2 or 3 times a week where we all gather in the kitchen and we all cook. Yeah. And our schedules are all busy enough that, sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes we have other things going on. But we try to make sure that there are times when we're just hanging out in the kitchen and cooking and talking and, enjoying.
And that's important. And you said as a priority, like, okay, if you've gone a couple of days without it, you'd be like, hey, when are we going to do this?
Right.
Because you missed it, because it brought you joy.
Exactly.
That's what traditions should be. They should make you feel like you're connected to the people that you love, and they bring you joy. And when they stop doing that, you need to revisit them. So yeah, definitely.
So do you have a tradition that you can visualize yourself starting another one besides game night?
I think this year you guys all came over the day after Christmas, the 26th, and I really loved that. I think that was, there's this whole thing like, okay, these 2 days, the Christmas Eve and Christmas, we go, because I don't want to rush it. I want to enjoy. I want to have conversations with people. I don't want to rush it.
Yeah.
And so you guys came over the 26th and hung out for several hours. We played trivia.
That was fun.
Talked, and I'm like, that's something I want to create. Like, okay, let's stretch it out. Let's not, and have times where we're not rushing and we're just hanging out and chit-chatting about stuff. Yeah, that's a tradition I want to start.
I think that was great. We had a wonderful time on the 26th, and I think that making days that aren't so crammed, you know, like those traditional holiday days like Thanksgiving Day or Christmas Day or Easter Day or whatever, you know, tend to be super hectic because everyone's trying to cram it, you know, all of those parties and whatever's connections and meals in. And so picking a day that is near but outside of that allows you to be more relaxed, and it gives people something to look forward to, you know, because then you can say, the 26th, that's going to be when I'm going to hang out with Amy and Jules or whatever. So it's again, find things that work within your schedule that don't add to the stress that you have. Make sure your traditions are relieving anxiety, not adding it to them.
They should be bringing you joy.
Yes.
And so that, I think I'm going to be much more deliberate about that and thinking about, and we don't have to have tons of them, but things that we do that create that structure that help my son, like, okay, we're going to prioritize that time and save that time and do this, but it's something fun or it's something important to us.
Right, definitely. And I think we have, in general, our society tends to, traditions are not always positive. You know, there's a lot of things that we consider to be traditional in our culture. I'm talking, we're in the United States, and we're in the South in the United States, so it's pretty specific. But it's sometimes things are immovable and they're not healthy. You know, it's traditional for gender roles, or it's tradition for whatever. You know, there's a long laundry list of things. And I think we need to push back on those things, that just because something's called a tradition doesn't mean it's a healthy thing. And, when we identify those, that's where, our social justice brain cells should turn on, and we need to push the boundaries of that to make sure that we're not holding traditions in place that are harmful. And I think that as you were talking, I was thinking about social media. Sometimes we let we'll be scrolling, doing that death scroll that we do on social media, and we'll see so many people that we know having, like, I did this and this and this. You're like, oh, I didn't do all those things, or they got their tree up already. You let that kind of get under your, maybe it's under your skin.
Maybe December is the time that you take it off, or those times, like, you just don't tune in, because people love to, like, look at all the fun things I did during this time, and I made all these cookies and did all this, and I'm like, I didn't do any of that. So so if seeing that social media causes anxiety because you're seeing people practice their traditions, maybe it's time to step back from that and go, this should not be a time of feeling that pressure and expectation. It should be relaxation and joy and being around people that you love.
Definitely. We had a conversation in our house this year around, and again, we're recording this right after the Christmas holidays.
Yeah,
so
that's why we're thinking about it so much.
I think we're thinking about it so much, but one of the conversations we had in our household was, do we put up a tree?
Yeah.
And we have 2 rowdy dogs, and a tree does not serve our household at all, because my male dog would go over and pee on it because he would think that it was his. None of us want that to happen in the house. But also, it's just like there's the mess, and then there's the, everyone wants to put up a tree, but no one wants to take down the tree. And it's kind of like we haven't had a tree on the regular for probably a decade, and it's actually okay. It's not that we don't put up decorations. We put a wreath on the door. We've got some pretty things that we set around the house, but it's very subdued compared to a lot of people's homes during this time. We
literally put nothing out this year. And my son asked a couple of times, are we going to put something up? And I'm like, yeah, we'll do that later. And then we got to like the 22nd. I'm like, it's kind of too late. And putting up that kind of stuff makes me anxious. And he knows that. We've had conversations with it, and that but there's people out there who are like, as soon as Halloween comes, or like as soon as October, I mean, they've got their tree up. And to me, I'm like, if putting up a tree brings you joy, put it up.
Go for it.
Put it up in the middle of July. Just go for it. But it does not make me feel that way.
Yeah.
Because we live in a home that's smaller, and whatnot. And so for a long time, it caused me a lot of stress because I had the wildcat Rufus. He attacked in many a tree that would come tumbling down, and so I always used him as an excuse. But now he's gone, I don't have those excuses anymore. But I'm like, if I put it up, I want to enjoy it. And this year, I just didn't want to put it up because it was making me anxious just thinking about it. So I'm like, I didn't do it. So I had to like sit down and go, Amy, this is not going to bring you joy. Don't do it.
And there's nothing that says you have to put up a tree.
No.
Heck, just put a picture of a tree up.
Yeah, I could do that.
You know what we were doing in our house this year?
What?
We had the YouTube fireplace.
Yeah.
And we put that thing on, and we put on some classical music, and it was great.
Yeah.
But it was non-traditional, but it made it feel Christmassy and homey.
Yeah.
Even though it was a digital fire.
Yeah, just do you, boo. Yeah, that's what my big message is. Do you. And traditions are lovely. Like saying goodnight to my son, see you next year, brings me so much happiness. I mean, it's just a nice way to end the day and we'll literally be like, I love you. Good night. Because we want those last things to say to each other. We always want the last word. Like he'll say, I'm like, here's something else.
Yes.
And that's a lovely tradition. And he may pass that on, or he may not. But again, it brings me joy, so I should do it. But
Definitely.
if it doesn't, I need to revisit it. So I'm not going to sing the song again. The tradition. I did it. We were both talking about getting ready for this episode. That we sung that many a time. So during this episode, we talked about the importance of revisiting a tradition. Like if it's serving you, if it's bringing you joy, or how you're forming new ones. So what were your big takeaways, Sass, from this episode?
I think that the big takeaway is that traditions can really be hard for people. I myself am a good example in that I really feel like I've shed a lot of like what I would consider my family or childhood traditions just because in my life now they don't serve me.
Right.
So and then I'm also really leery of starting new traditions, which is kind of sad, but I think it's just because I don't want that expectation of that tradition to take joy out of it.
Right.
So I love tradition. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of things that we do, like the meal preparations and things like that are definitely traditions. But bigger traditions like holidays or vacations or things like that can then become a weight.
Right.
So it's kind of like, I guess my takeaway is that I want to be careful with them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we should be doing things because we enjoy them and we love them and they bring us joy. And for instance, putting my son to bed and those rituals. But do I think that when my son is like 18, 19, 20, he's going to let me tuck him into bed and tell him, see you next year.
Probably not.
Probably not. Probably not. Definitely. So, and they'll change. And I think that's the goal, is to let them change as the people change, and let them meet the needs that you have at that moment, and not that heavy weight of expectation is what makes us anxious. Like, okay, we got to do it this way. We've always done it this way. But that doesn't serve us anymore. So can we revisit that? Can we do that? And not waiting for someone to pass away to change it. Sometimes you need to change it up during that, so that if you've been doing the same thing for, decades and decades, and suddenly someone passes away, then it feels so different. Maybe you should be changing it as you go.
Yeah, definitely. But I think part of it may be the resistance to change.
Yeah.
Like people have a real fear of facing change. It makes them anxious. And so they tend to keep things in place or do things the same way, just because changing would involve change.
Yeah. People hate change.
That made no sense. But it's kind of, people hate change. It makes them anxious. And we've talked about this in the past, even good change can cause anxiety.
Right.
So when you have something like, this is a tradition, and you want me to change this tradition, it's like, that means, I'm going to have to go through an anxiety period.
Right.
So I understand why people are reluctant to change those traditions. But I do think we all have to re-examine things and why we're doing them in our lives. So take an opportunity here and there to do an audit, do a tradition audit.
Yeah, definitely. And just the change. I mean, it doesn't have to be a big change. It could be a little change, but everyone should be getting the same love and joy out of it. And if you're, maybe you're not feeling anxious, but maybe people around you are feeling anxious about things. So it's worth a conversation. So traditions are important. They reflect who we are. We pass them down through generations. But it's important to stop and revisit and say, is this making me happy?
Yeah.
And if not, let me explore why, and let me talk about it.
Definitely. I mean, when you were saying that, it made me think about, we all have changed. Our culture has changed so much. And going back to the Christmas example, we don't live in a time where we put real candles on trees.
Right.
We don't do that anymore because it's a fire hazard and we can burn our houses down. Now we have LED lights. But that was a tradition that was started in the Victorian times, that was the norm, and that was the beautiful thing that everyone was doing. But we learned, that wasn't a healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think that we just have to evolve, find the things in your traditions that bring you joy and hope and make you happy, and then tweak them so that they fit within your life and the lives of your family. So if you haven't followed us on social media.
Why not? Why haven't you followed us?
Right? I mean, we're out there. We're on Facebook, we're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, and we're on YouTube. YouTube's, we've got some people who are actually, watching there over, the other podcast platforms, which has really been interesting.
I know.
But we want you to punch those buttons and follow us and subscribe and do all the things, so that we can have a conversation with you. This is about a conversation. We don't want to be just talking to ourselves.
Although we do that.
We do that.
We do that.
Definitely. But we want to be talking with you too. So today's episode has been about traditions. And so we want to hear about some of your favorite traditions and some of the traditions that you've been happy to boot to the curb, because we've all had to do that. And thanks for listening, y'all. Thank you for joining us for Free Range Flock. Our goal is to inspire and celebrate who we are, the Generation X kids who grew up and decided to do things their way, with grace, humor, and joy. This has been a production of Sassy Am. If you want to learn more about our podcast, follow our blog, share your positive insights about being a free ranger, or to suggest topics or guests for future episodes, please visit our website at sassayam.com. That's SASSAYAM.com. Keep pushing.